Hey, Bengals fans, you are listening to another episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, the number one Bengals fan podcast out there, part of SB Nation's Cincy Jungle podcast channel, one of a handful of great Bengals podcasts out there for all of you to digest and listen to. I am Anthony Cosenza. I'm joined by my co-host, John Sheeran. John, unfortunately, my friend, we are not talking about a Bengals victory. The Cincinnati Bengals kind of did what the Cincinnati Bengals do in a way. We'll talk about that. But what I mean by that is grabbing defeat in the jaws of victory in some ways. How are you feeling about the team after week one, my friend?
Oh, I'm just trying to push off this week and go to the next one.
Well, we can't just push off. We got to talk about it a little bit. So, but by the way, did anybody catch what we're doing there? There was just puns galore right there. Hopefully they caught it. I think we're pretty funny, John, but maybe that's just me. We're going to talk about week one. We're going to do it in a little different format than normally just kind of breaking down a game. What we're going to do is we're going to do a little encouraged, discouraged. We're going to say, give you a facet about the game. Were you encouraged or discouraged? Why? So we'll talk about that. John's already leaving, so apparently he doesn't like that segment idea, but that's okay. We'll get him back. We'll reel him back in. And so we'll go over week one and do it that way. We've got a soundbite of the week, an interesting one. It's one that I'm going to, stroke my ego with for this week. We'll do a little bit of a preview of the Cleveland Browns game, update you on the injury report and everything going into Thursday night football. And then, of course, we will get out of here with a mic drop and or call of our shot, which we started last week. Want to do a little reminder. You can get this show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, of course, YouTube, how many of you are watching live, or the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. There is a subscribe button right under John's left shoulder there if you're watching on YouTube. So go ahead and click that, subscribe. Leave us a rating on the Cincy Jungle audio channel as well. We've got a great slate of programs. We're okay, but the others, Orange is the New Black by Ace and Zim, and Matt Minnick's Chalk Talk are really killing it. By the way, John, did you happen to listen to Ace and Zim's interview with AJ Green last night?
I did, and there was some questionable audio moments in that, but it was a fantastic interview. Definitely check it. Those two are such great interviews. They have such great chemistry, and this isn't the first time they've interviewed a player, but I don't know, man. They had the connection, so if there's a player that you want to see interviewed on that channel, I would definitely hit those guys up and see what they can do, because they can run some pretty quality guests, and that Green interview was a lot of fun to listen to.
Yeah, if there's one thing about the COVID pandemic this year is it has allowed a lot of access for this show and other great podcasts out there to get front row access to a lot of great players, Bengals players past and present. So really great interview with AJ Green by those guys. So pat on the back to you, Ace and Zim. Good show there. And then, of course, we've got a new video up on our YouTube channel from Matt Minnick talking about some offensive line issues. So get all of those shows and get our show, how I mentioned. We appreciate the support. John, let's talk about the Bengals 16-13 loss to the Chargers, as if we haven't talked about it enough. Let's talk about it some more. We'll get to the encouraged, discouraged. I guess give us a macro view, just a look at what you kind of took away from that loss, especially the way it transpired.
It looked like a team that has a bad offensive line, has a lot of new special teams pieces, and has a rookie quarterback playing for the first time in 9 months. No preseason, with very few contact practices. These guys need to get synced. Like, Joe Burrow needs experience, he needs reps. And there's value in what he did on Sunday, but it was ugly for the most part. I mean, he summed it up pretty damn well. He played bad for 3.5 quarters and had a great last 3 minutes, a little 3-minute drill after an interception that was completely uncharacteristic of what he was at LSU. But the whole thing was like, oh, he's not going to make the same mistake again. Oh, he's extremely careful with the ball, but he's also very precise. He's a great decision maker. He's a great innovator out of the pocket. These things are going to happen to a guy who's never played in the NFL before. He's never. Even in the SEC, he never played against a defensive line that had a guy like Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa coming off both edges at the same time for 60 snaps. This is new. This is how it goes for rookie quarterbacks. So anyone expecting Burrow to light up the Chargers defense that had two amazing cornerbacks to go with those two edge rushers, throw for like 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, even to a stacked receiving core, was getting ahead of themselves. It's too high expectations, even for a guy like Burrow, who had such a fantastic last season in college and has all these translatable traits into the NFL. It's going to take time. And it's going to take time for the offensive line too. I don't know how much more time you can give Bobby Hart at this point, because he just is who he is. I don't know how long that leash is, but I hope it's not too long. But yeah, like I know that Matt said that offensive line and special teams were the two units that he thought were going to take the most time to mesh into this NFL without a preseason. And the first month or so is going to be really scrappy with those two units. Those were the two worst units for this Bengals team. Like they missed some opportunities on special teams in terms of downing punts inside the Chargers territory, and the offensive line was just shaky for the first 20, 25 minutes. And that really, it impacted the game flow of the game for the offense. And at the end of the day, if your defense only allows 16 points, you should be able to win that game, especially at home. And they just weren't able to do that because they couldn't get going for the first 50 minutes of the game.
Shaky describing the offensive line as being kind for those first 2 quarters, John, and we'll talk more about that in a second. We'll get to kind of the encouraging and discouraging facets of the game. My thing, I agree with everything you said there. I want to say this, and I guess I don't want to start the show off on kind of a really sour or negative sounding note, but I came away and really have been having this thought the past few days. I came away when I saw Joe Burrow's facial expression on the sideline when Randy Bullock missed that kick. Okay. I almost got a little worried. I know it's one game. I know there's no preseason. I know I've been around this team for a long time. And what I was most excited about with Joe Burrow coming to the Bengals, we've said this on the show, the intangible stuff. Yeah, he's talented on field. He's got great football IQ, everything, but that clutch gene, right? The winner, the guy who had the amazing college season, and he's going to bring that winning attitude to Cincinnati, and he's going to drag everybody else with him. Well, he tried his damnedest to do that. Even though he screwed up a couple times in this game, which is to be expected. Rookie quarterback, no preseason. He tried his damnedest, and even with the whatever you want to call the offensive pass interference call on A.J. Green at the end of the game, he got him down there. He had a would-be go-ahead touchdown, or at the minimum, a game-tying field goal set up for this team to go into overtime, and the team choked. The kicker choked. The rest of the team choked throughout different facets in the game. By the way, if you want to hate on Randy Bullock, go ahead. But if the guy got injured, he got injured during the kick. You can't really help that. And there were many other missed opportunities in this football game, as there always is when you look at one missed kick. But what I'm getting at, John, is I just kind of came away a little bit worried that the Joe Burrow effect just may be minimized a little bit because of the ghosts of Bengals past and what the issues have been with the Cincinnati Bengals and their way of not being able to close out games, even with a Joe Burrow at quarterback.
The Joe Burrow effect that you're referring to, I think that's going to take time. Again, this is his first time in full NFL uniform going up against another team doing an actual NFL type game situation. But a couple other things. One, I want to know what the cutoff is in terms of seconds left on the clock for them to not run one more play. 7 seconds is still a decent amount of time. And moving back 10 yards from the 3 to the 13, you can still get off a very quick pass into the end zone, leave at least 2 or 3 seconds left for your kicker to go. And if the pass is incomplete, I don't know what the cutoff is in terms of them just deciding to kick the field goal. I know they didn't have a timeout. I don't care. Go for the win. Yep. Again, what do you have to lose? You lost the game anyways. And I know you're not expecting Randy Bullock to miss a 31-yard kick or both of his calves to explode mid-kick, but try one more time. I don't know what the cutoff is. I would like to know. They're never going to reveal that information anyways, but I just did not like the call. It was one of the few non-aggressive play calls or situations in this game. Also, everyone's blaming Bullock for whatever. That's fine. Kickers missed, and they're the scapegoat. The Browns made their kicker the scapegoat. They sacrificed him even though they lost by like 30. So that's not anything new. And everyone's blaming Bobby Hart because he had a bad game. And those two are just unpopular players. They're players that are easy, whipping boys, I think is the term. Joe Mixon fumbled, in the fourth quarter, and took points off the board for a potential Bengals drive.
Yep.
Joe Burrow threw an interception, and again, Joe Burrow did not play good. I knew you were talking about the intangibles impacts of his arrival with this team, but like his performance impacted the game. Like you can't score 13 points at home and expect to win every single time, even when your defense is playing as good as it did. So I understand the scapegoats in this game are Bobby Hart and Randy Bullock, because those are two easy targets to pick on, and they didn't perform at their best when they needed to. But also there's just plenty of other things that went wrong in this game, and it's understandable why fans are mad at those specific people, or they're not blaming them or not putting their fair shame or blame on them. But it comes down to way more than just one clear pass interference call and one missed kick.
The fact that you brought up the issue with 7 seconds left on the clock, take a shot, that sort of thing. There are some mixed opinions out there. I'm with you, though, John. To me, if you're Zach Taylor, this supposed offensive guru, you got to have a play in your playbook for that situation. 12-yard line, a 5-second play that's to the pylon. If it's incomplete, it's incomplete, or you give AJ another shot with Joe Burrow, maybe giving him a fade, a quick shot. Then you've got a second or two on the clock. You got to have something in your back pocket for a situation like that. Easy for me to say sitting on my couch, but Zach Taylor was hired for his offensive mind, and in my opinion, I think that he needs to have something in his arsenal for a situation like that. Furthermore, I know no preseason, I know rookie quarterback, I know all of the issues, but the Bengals may not have even had to deal with that situation at the end of the game had they not burned timeouts throughout the entire early portion of the second half. They had 0 timeouts to work with at the end of the game there, and that also killed them. A little bit of questionable game management by Zach Taylor and company there. So let's start with encouraged or discouraged. As you can see, I've already put the bias in this one, but coaching staff, okay? Were you encouraged by what you saw? Because there were some second half adjustments on the offensive line. There were some things that the coaching staff did show. They kind of tried to formulate a game plan that sort of emulated what LSU ran. They split out their wide receivers, I think one of the most in the NFL in terms of snaps. So were you encouraged or discouraged at what you saw from the coaching staff this week?
Definitely did not start encouraged. I think the 4th and 2 at the midfield was something that I was extremely pissed off about, and I didn't understand why they didn't have a play. Like I know the offense was not doing good at that point, but again, like that's a situation where I feel like there's a clear argument to go for, especially with how your defense is playing. And the argument is, just pin them back down inside their own 15 or 10. They couldn't because their gunners played bad that game, ended up going into the end zone. And then a couple plays later, the Chargers end up at like the 45-yard line. Now, I don't remember if that drive ended in a field goal or if they didn't score at all, but I still think that was just a turnover in their own regard, and they left points on the board. Everyone's talking about the adjustments that they made to make the pass protection better. I don't know if that was a result of just more play action or just spreading things out, or just that, Bobby Hart ended up winning a little bit more reps later on in the game against Bosa and Ingram. But there's still a lot of questions with Zach Taylor. He's 2-15. You can't really sugarcoat that at this point, and it's the first game with his new quarterback, so there is time to be given to him. But at some point, you got to put up results in that situation. And only 5 passes beyond 15 yards is almost inexcusable to me. And I just have more questions with this coaching staff than answers right now.
Agreed. And I was actually a bit discouraged by the coaching staff, not only for what I said about the clock management and not really having a play in that critical situation at the end of the game, but also T. Higgins, Auden Tate, where are you? Why? I understand the rapport was built with Mike Thomas this preseason. I understand John Ross brings a dimension that those other receivers do not, but we saw John Ross be John Ross a couple of times, or at least once in this game. And these other guys, they aren't moving the ball. They aren't putting up points. Why not give your exciting second-round rookie and the guy with the immense catch radius, Auden Tate, why not give them some reps, some looks, and have them try and beat some defensive backs?
Also, on runs, on first and second down, Bengals averaged -0.26 expected points added. They were awful on the situations, and it just kept happening. It was like 6 or 7 times they ran on second and long. A couple of them were just toss plays that were just easily snuffed out by the Chargers. They don't have the personnel to do that, especially in those situations where it's just not optimal at all to run the ball. I know you don't want to put too much on Burrow. I know that's like the perception right now, but you gotta let the dude have those situations, because that's the smart play call, to just pass in the situations. When it comes down to running or passing, more times than not, the answer is passing. And Joe Mixon did not have a good game. He was the worst graded offensive player for the offense. Not just because of the fumble. He just couldn't do a lot, even with good blocking. There was one play he ran for 7 yards and he tripped on I think Trey Hopkins, who was pinning on a Michael Jordan trap block, and Michael Jordan ended up paving the way perfectly for him. And he just let his momentum just carry him forward. That's been a problem with him for the last couple of years now. Not a lot of people want to admit it, but even when he has perfect blocking, he doesn't always take advantage of it. So the run game has issues to fix, even with perfect blocking, and that only happens a handful of times during the game. And I know they don't want to put a ton on Burrow, but that's just not how you win.
So let's go to the offensive. Well, let's go to Burrow. Let's go to Burrow. Encouraged, discouraged. I mean, I think I know the answer here, and I think based on what the end of the game showed us, I mean, I think I know where you're going to go here, but encouraged or discouraged with Joe Burrow's performance?
The expectations again are something to take into account. It wasn't. I don't think it was smart to expect him to light the world on fire immediately. Like, that's so rare for a rookie quarterback, especially in his first game. I remember Cam Newton did it 10 years ago, but Cam is Cam. He's an alien. He's a freak. Also, that was a good matchup against that Cardinals defense way back then. But again, this Chargers defense is pretty good. Like, they have 2 really good corners, 2 really good edges, athletic linebackers. So they were able to minimize separation the Bengals receivers were able to get. And they pressured him immediately and often. And I think out of the 36 throws I charted, I think I had Burrow accurate or made a good decision for about 30 of them. But the misses that he had, the miss to John Ross in the end zone, the clear miss to AJ Green in the end zone, and obviously the interception to Melvin Ingram, which was just inexcusable in every sense of the word. Those decisions matter, and they took a lot of points off the board. So accurate and poised and decisive for most of the game. I think that deserves a lot of credit, and especially in the last drive. You say what you want about potentially the Chargers playing off and allowing stuff in front of him. He still made good decisions. He still made accurate throws. Still made a lot of clutch throws on that drive and was able to put them in that position. So the reason why they were down 3 points is primarily because of Joe Burrow and that offensive line, obviously. But at the end of the day, he was able to get them in a position to win. I think that still counts for something. So it was ugly, but promising in the ways that you wanted it to.
There was one throw he made towards the end of the game. I think it was maybe the final drive, if I remember correctly, where he tried to drop one right in the bucket to AJ Green after he eluded some pressure. And it ended up, I think Green had one of his feet out of bounds. And if you listen to that interview from Ace and Zim, AJ Green talks about it. But I came away, just that was one throw where Andy Dalton trying to make that play would just be nowhere even close. And the fact that this ball was dropped right in between 2 defenders, almost completed AJ Green on the sideline. That throw was pretty incredible. There were a couple of other throws. The one that he wasn't expecting the snap, and it kind of bounced off his thigh a little bit, and he shot a nice ball across the middle. I think that one was to AJ Green as well. There were a couple of nice plays. The AJ Green miss, that was just like a gut punch. And I'm curious, John, so do you place that John Ross? There's a lot of debate about the John Ross end zone throw. Is that a John Ross issue, or is that a Joe Burrow issue, or just a little bit of both?
It probably goes with both. I don't think anybody has counted that as an official drop for Ross, but again, it's not really official. It's just trying to decipher if the ball actually touched his hands. Regardless if it did, and I think Ross could have made a slightly better effort to haul that in. And I think from the grand scheme of things, it was a really accurate throw. So, I mean, it can go both ways with that, but also, there's some more things to like about Burrow's performance that I didn't say. Like on that AJ Green throw, I believe he audibled they ran a 3x2 empty set, and he audibled to get AJ Green into that sluggo because he was going up against, I think, Nick Vigil in the slot. It was a clear mismatch, and he was able to look off the safety to his left and just throw. He had Green wide open. He just overthrew it a little bit, and the touchdown run that he had, again, out of a 3x2 empty, that was an audible too, and he followed Trey Hopkins perfectly and patiently behind, and he was able to accelerate into the end zone. So there was a lot of, subtle things that maybe you wouldn't notice at the beginning of the first watch, but You recognize that Burrow was making some clear-cut pre-snap decisions, putting his team in a good chance to win. But again, it comes with experience. He's going to make those throws more times than not. Unfortunately, in a game where you just have a bad offensive performance in general, those misses hurt more times than not.
So let's move to offensive line. This one's a tough one all around, John, because you mentioned the issues of Bobby Hart. Xavier Su'a-Filo left the game. Billy Price had some ups and downs. Trey Hopkins had a largely decent day. Jonah Williams was beat a couple of times. Go watch Matt Minnick's Twitter timeline, by the way. He's got some nice film breakdown on Jonah Williams. But if you also look at Paul Alexander, former Bengals offensive line coach, his Twitter account, he was very complimentary of Jonah Williams on the left side. And then, of course, like I mentioned, Bobby Hart. Now, the weird thing with Pro Football Focus, and I know a lot of people take that as absolute football scripture in terms of data and metrics, Bobby Hart had a better PFF score than Jonah Williams, and Trey Hopkins had a better score than both of them. None of them cracked 70. So I think they were in the mid to high 60s without having that right in front of me. So yeah, to me, it's a mixed bag. And again, it's a tale of two halves. Overall, I'm pretty discouraged, I would say. What do you think, John?
For the record, Bobby Hart's grade is 0.4 larger or greater than Jonah Williams. And that's primarily because Bobby Hart was actually one of their better run blockers. If you go back and watch the game, he was doing pretty good work in the run game. He was one of the only few guys that was doing good work in the run game. But there were obvious misses with Hart. He allowed 6 pressures. I think he had the 4th or 5th worst pass blocking grade of the entire NFL. I think one of the worst for right tackles. He got beat like a drum against Bosa. That's what we should have expected. And with Williams, he was largely very clean. And the first clear miss that he had was something that was a problem with him going back to Alabama and a predicted problem for him going into the NFL. Those inside counter moves, like guys who can maybe leverage the outside and then go back inside with either a swim or some type of spin or whatever. Like Bosa got him on a clear swim move on one of the first true pass blocking snaps that he had. Allowed the pressure and Burrow couldn't get rid of the ball, and Burrow gets sacked by Jerry Tiller, who comes off his block because of the Bosa pressure. So aside from that, Williams had maybe like 1 or 2 more pressures allowed, but largely remained clean because like that's just who he is. He's a technician, and anytime you're not going to have those inside counters, he's going to be able to handle it even with suboptimal length and size, I guess. So Williams was okay, and Hart and ended up having more good reps than I think you would have expected. But again, like you can't have all those misses, and that you can't have the bad with Hart and expect to maintain cleanliness for the entire game. It was expected because of the competition that he was going up against, but you can't live with that. You can't have that and expect to be clean on offense, and especially for a quarterback that you don't want to get hit for more times in his first couple starts. Like it's a recipe for disaster.
And I think with Hart, you mentioned that he was pretty able at most points in the game in the running game. I think it's the errors that he makes are so egregious and such drive killers that it just really accentuates his errors more so than maybe the other linemen. But I watched again some Matt. I had planned to do some work on Jonah Williams, but Matt Minnick did it for me. So I saw he had a clip also showing that Bobby Hart on a missed assignment or something of the like really was kind of one of the causes of Joe Mixon getting hit when he did not expect it and fumble the football. So that is also a film snippet breakdown on Matt Minnick's Twitter timeline. So go check that out. But, it's kind of weird to me. I'm encouraged by Jonah Williams. First pro start, went up against some great talent. I'm encouraged long-term about what we've seen there. But rest of the line, Trey Hopkins, I'm encouraged as well. But the rest of the line, we saw what it was for the first 2 quarters, and it was not pretty. Let's transition to the defense, John. We could go group by group if you want. Let's go kind of the front tier, the front sevens, front 8, the linebackers and defensive line. Let's go there, and then we'll go to secondary because I think we know what the secondary is going to be. But let's start with kind of the non-safeties cornerbacks. Let's go linebackers and defensive line. Were you encouraged or discouraged with what you saw? Because look, to me, it seemed as if it was much more manageable in terms of, chunk yardage, not giving up, and the Bengals were getting off the field. They held them a couple of times on 4th down. Like you said, on your home turf, 16 points given up, you should win that game. But, the running backs ended up kind of getting some yardage at the end of the game. They ran for well over 100 yards, and there were some issues here and there. But what do you think? Encouraged or discouraged by the defense?
It was encouraging for a couple. When you look at the front seven, I think 78% of their snaps came in just even man fronts, so just like a traditional 4-man front. So they didn't have a lot of opportunities to go into their 3-4 looks because they just didn't have the personnel, especially with Mike Daniels going down with an injury and even DJ Reader going down. So the depth of defensive tackle was extremely tested, and when Reader went out, they gave up some chunk plays on the ground. I think that's what happened with their second touchdown with Josh Kelly. He just ran up the gut, and that defense is kind of exposed without Reader out there. But I think they held their own against the run for most of the game. They managed to limit Eckler's impact there. Tackling was very good, I think. Yep. The guy who kind of stood out to me was Josh Bynes. A lot of juice on some of those outside runs and was closing them pretty quickly. And it was refreshing to see, because even Pratt, I think he ended up having a couple of missed tackles and a couple of misreads in terms of getting into his fits, but he still played pretty decently for what can be expected of him. You had the rookie linebackers and Logan Wilson and Akeem Davis-Gaither coming in on the first drive on third down, used largely in coverage and a couple blitz opportunities. I think Davis-Gaither ended up having a pressure on Tyrod Taylor that forced an incompletion on a deep ball. Unfortunately, the pass rush just wasn't really there. Geno Atkins' absence, it hurt because he had some mismatches against the battered Chargers interior offensive line, but you didn't really have Carl Lawson or Carlos Dunlap getting home pretty consistently. I think Lawson ended up having a couple of pressures, and one on Tyrod Taylor, who still completed a deep ball to Mike Williams, so credit to Tyrod, but unfortunately, pass rush did not get home pretty consistently. Sam Hubbard had a great day in run defense, but again, it was pretty pedestrian from a pass rushing standpoint. So, they limited the run pretty well. Tyrod had a couple of option runs and option keepers that were contained pretty well by the defense. So encouraging relative to what the linebackers were last year, encouraging relative to what the run defense was last year. Unfortunately, the pass rush couldn't really get home that much. And even though the defense played very well overall, that was still a little bit underwhelming to see.
Yeah, that's why I love doing the show with you and doing the show with Matt. You guys do my work for me. I love it. Josh Bynes was very active, also had a quarterback sack. Pratt, 12 total tackles. You were right. There were a couple misses there, but 12 total tackles, and the tackling in general was much, much better. And yes, you took the words out of my mouth with the DJ Reader effect. When he left, that defense was different. When you don't have DJ Reader and no Geno Atkins, that defense is a lot different, and you can tell. Thankfully, DJ Reader, who was carted off the field, that looks scary. He came back, just had some cramps, and then should be good to go. Again, Thursday night, we'll talk more about that in just a minute. So let's end the week 1 chatter and encouraged, discouraged. Let's end it with the secondary. I was extremely encouraged with what I saw from that group. There were some ups and downs from Darius Phillips, but he did have a pass breakup there, a couple pass breakups. William Jackson was great. That was some of the best football I've seen him play. And Jesse Bates, that was probably, without garnering an interception, you could argue that was his best game. I think he came close to a 92 PFF score on that on Sunday. Did get flagged. It's kind of one of those things. What do you do on that play for Jesse Bates? But he was all over the field. Not so much fanfare for Von Bell, but I mean those guys were out there. Mackenzie Alexander was making plays. So for me, I was pretty encouraged by what I saw from the secondary.
The third highest graded coverage unit in the NFL according to PFF, and that goes to show you why coverage sometimes matters more than just pass rush. It's nice to be able to get home with only 4 guys, but when you have William Jackson, Mackenzie Alexander, Jesse Bates all playing tremendously against a stacked receiving core, or just a really front heavy receiving core, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler and Hunter Henry, that was encouraging to see, and it didn't allow Tyrod Taylor to make a lot of easy throws. The throws that Tyrod Taylor didn't make, though, he earned them. Like, there were some dimes that he was dropping against some tight coverage, specifically against Darius Phillips a couple times. And with Phillips, it was, there wasn't obviously a lot of plays he made on the ball, and that's what you want from him when you play him, because he has a playmaker mentality like that. But he just, unfortunately, it's kind of been what his career has been so far. It's been a lot of giving up the occasional big play or two, and this time was against Mike Williams, and even And even if he stopped one of the receptions, he was called for defensive holding, which kept the drive alive. So Bates played spectacular. I mean, the penalty is just I'm with Joe Goodberry on this one. I think at some point you just have to hammer into these guys that you cannot go for the head, even if you don't make contact with the head, even if it's just leading with the shoulder, making contact with the shoulder. The refs are going to call that 10 times out of 10. You got to go lower, even if it means potentially taking out some guys' legs. Like they have to hammer that in because they're just always going to get flagged for it, and you're always going to put your team in a bad situation. And he got lucky that later in the game when he led with his head, it was offset because Keenan Allen led with his head and he initiated the contact as well. So they have to hammer that in, and eventually guys have to evolve with that. But Bates played spectacular. He was all over the field. Unfortunately, Von Bell got caught sleeping on a couple of crossing routes, and he ended up not playing really his best game. But Mackenzie Alexander was quietly had a really good game in the slot as well. So really encouraging from the secondary. William Jackson played a lot more physical, a lot more in tightly contested coverage situations. So, the secondary played fantastic, and that was part of the reason why they had one of the better defensive performances in the league this week.
Keenan Allen was basically a non-factor, and William Jackson was largely responsible for him. So, you gotta like that there. Aquila the Great in the live YouTube chat, even though he or she disagreed with me vehemently about my kicker comment earlier in the show, Mike Williams was pushing off harder than AJ Green did against that corner. They never called it on him, and it's a damn shame they called it on Green. Definitely agree with you there, Aquila the Great. The other, just overall though, John, on defense, concerning, and I guess it's the Geno Atkins effect. Ben Baby joined us last week and talked about how the pass rush starts and ends with Geno Atkins on the defensive line. He not only generates it himself, but he opens it up for everybody else. A lack of pass rush against a Chargers line that was kind of patchwork. They had a lot of injuries that they were experiencing on that line. I think the Bengals had 2 sacks on the day, one of which was from Bynes there. And the other issue, a lack of turnovers. They were -2 in the turnover margin. They were one of the worst in that statistical category last year. The Chargers were surprisingly worse in that statistical category last year. So, and guess what? The pass rush and turnovers oftentimes go hand in hand. When you have a good pass rush, you force bad throws, tips, all that kind of stuff. So those overall for the defense is a bit concerning for me, but I think they did enough to give the team a chance to win.
I'm trying to remember if they had an opportunity for an interception, but I don't think that they really did. I think Tyrod kept it out of harm's way for the most part. So, and someone said that Lawson did have a sack, but that play was weird because it was Lawson and Khalid Kareem on the field at edge, and both tackles kind of did like the catapult technique where they just shot the edges forward, and usually they do that on like screens or something where it's like a QB draw, but it wasn't. Tyrod just took a 3-step drop out of the shotgun, and he just got rattled back there, and Lawson had a clear path once he turned the corner. So it was Kareem who kind of forced the pressure, and Lawson finished it up. But it's not really a clean sack, and that's kind of reflected in his pass rushing grade, only a 67.2, which is the highest pass rushing grade for any of these guys. So the pass rush, it did get a sack and it did get a handful of pressures, but for the most part, Chargers offensive line kept him in check, allowed Tyrod to make some clean throws and clean pockets. So that's ultimately why they had some success and why they ended up putting 16 points on the board.
But the Bengals fall to 0-1, a game they coulda, woulda, shoulda had at home against the Chargers. This may be one they look back at later in the year, depending on how the rest of things go, and they grimace a little bit. But we'll see. There's a lot to be encouraged about in this start. I know a lot of people are saying we're doom and gloomers in here in our live chats. That's fine if you want to think that that's what we're being.
So it's evaluation. Come on, guys.
We're analyzing the game. I mean, whatever. But anyway, that's we'll look back at week 1 probably in a few weeks now, and I hope we don't wonder what could have been based on how the Bengals season is going. We're going to get to a stat of the week and then a soundbite of the week, and then we're going to talk about some Browns Thursday night football in just a second. Before we do, just a quick reminder to get this show on your favorite audio platform: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, iHeartRadio. You can also get, if you like joining us live, check out our YouTube channel. Join us on Cincy Jungle's Facebook page, or if you can't join us live, if we just start too late for you or you got work or whatever, you can always get our stuff after the fact. We'd love to have you join us live, though. By the way, we are doing a new show that we've done. We kicked it off last week, pregame. We do a pregame show courtesy of Narragansett Beer. We had Bengal Jim Foster join us from his drive-through tailgate last week, and we've got super fan Yaz joining us, I guess, this week, John. She's making waves out there in the Bengals community, and should be a really fun guest. So we are excited to have her on the pregame show, courtesy of Narragansett Beer. We will be kicking that off about an hour before kickoff of Thursday Night Football. So join us for that. It's more of a loose tailgate vibe for us. Yeah, we do some interviews and giveaways and all that kind of analysis, of course. But we're there to have some fun, as are all of you. So hopefully you enjoyed our first go around with that, and we'll be bringing that to you throughout the rest of the season. So, John, you have a stat of the week for us. Now that the regular season has started, we're going to kind of institute this as a small segment. Stat of the week. John and or I will provide stats of the week. And I know, John, you have a somewhat in-depth one that you want to share with us.
Yeah, it was just interesting. I saw it on Twitter from a guy named Anthony Reinhard. He was just kind of a football data expert, and he essentially calculated and tracked every single game this week in terms of how many minutes of quote-unquote garbage time that there were. Garbage time, in his definition, is either a play where the win probability for the winning team is either 80 to 90 or just above 90. So essentially over 80% win probability. Bengals had, I think, the Bengals Chargers game had about 1 minute, maybe less than 1 minute of garbage time, which was by far the lowest in the league. I think only the Titans and Broncos and the Cardinals and the 49ers were relatively close because they had like a couple of minutes of garbage time respectively. So this was the most tightly contested game of week one, a week where a lot of people didn't really know what to expect, a week where a game that was, I think, -3.5 for the away team, which is very rare for a week one opener for the home team. So this game was very close throughout the entire game, and there were obviously some momentum swingers. There were some big plays. Unfortunately, both turnovers, I think, were the most impactful plays in terms of an expected points added perspective for the Bengals. But this game was extremely competitive towards the end, and that, I think, shows you how competitive it was compared to everywhere else around the league.
I kind of gave mine out in our week one analysis here. I was going to kind of go with some PFF scores on the offensive line that I thought were pretty interesting. So I won't kind of rehash that because we talked about it a lot, but that it just caused me to a little bit. I know we all adhere to the PFF system, and rightfully so. They do great work. I know Evan McPhillips and all other, we've had him on this show, by the way, and other PFF contributors do great work. It just sometimes the eye test sometimes it doesn't line up with some of the scores. And then sometimes your eye test fools you as well. And you got to go back and you watch things. Like you said, John, with the Bobby Hart thing, he did have some good moments in the run game. And it caused me to go back and look at some of that. Based on his score, because some of these egregious errors that he commits just makes you say his score is going to be awful, right? And when you don't hear Jonah Williams' name called for good reasons, oftentimes in the game, it makes you reevaluate, kind of what you're seeing in the game and what those guys see. So, the within the 60s for those three guys that we really looked hard at, Trey Hopkins, Jonah Williams, and Bobby Hart. Those PFF scores to me were pretty interesting.
Hey, how about this too? And we're just going to throw out another PFF stat here. Joe Mixon's total rushing yards, rushing from the center to the left side, 6. From the center to the right side, 63.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where that Bobby Hart PFF grade goes, because I think going over the right tackle and against the right defensive end, he had 9 carries for about 37 yards. Going up the middle in the A gap between Trey Hopkins and Billy Price, who ended up playing a lot when Xavier Su'a-Filo got injured, he had, I believe, 6 carries for 26 yards. So Mixon was by far more productive rushing towards the right side, and maybe that was in part because they had either Uzomah or Sample also blocking on that side when they're in 11 personnel. But unfortunately, it wasn't the greatest day for Jonah Williams run blocking. That was partly why his PFF grade wasn't exactly reflective of his overall work in pass protection. It ended up being a little bit lower than Bobby Hart, but that's where Mixon found success in the run game. Unfortunately, his one fumble was on an outside carry to the right.
Yeah, on the right side for sure. Well, those are our stats of the week. So we'll be bringing those to you weekly as the season progresses, and giving you some different stats that we find pretty interesting from the previous game. We're going to transition here before we go into analysis of the Cleveland Browns game on Thursday Night Football. I'm going to stroke my own ego here, as I teased at the beginning of the show. Earlier this week, I was going to play a clip from Colin Cowherd, but I kind of, talking about Joe Burrow and how he has flip-flopped his opinion on Joe Burrow from maybe a couple of months ago based on what he saw week one. I decided against that for the soundbite of the week because you get to hear one from me. I recently had the opportunity to speak to some NFL Network media. Steve Smith Sr., the former wide receiver of the Panthers and the Ravens, Colleen Wolfe, who's kind of the lead anchor of Thursday Night Football, and then, of course, Joe Thomas, the future Hall of Fame tackle for the Cleveland Browns. Kind of surreal moment. I was in with some heavy hitters in terms of media members, John, so that was kind of interesting. But I asked a question. It was kind of a two-part question to the trio about what they thought about Joe Burrow's performance in week one, where the Bengals should be at in terms of encouragement, and what this game means to both just Joe Burrow in terms of his early development. So you're going to hear from Steve Smith, you're going to hear me, and then you're going to hear Steve Smith, then you're going to hear Joe Thomas, and then you're going to hear Colleen Wolfe. It is a couple of minutes, so bear with it, but I thought it was something, hasn't really been put out on the airwaves yet. I thought it was something you guys would enjoy hearing from these folks. So here you go. Thanks, Andrew. A question for all three of you, if you have an opinion on it. Some talk already about Baker Mayfield. Wanted to ask you about the quarterback he's going to be going up against this week in Joe Burrow. I wanted to get your guys' maybe quick analysis on what you saw from him in week one. Obviously, some ups, some downs, fought through some offensive line issues, but gave the team a chance to win. And I also would like to ask you how important you think this week two game, road divisional primetime game, is for the development of Joe Burrow early in his career.
I guess I'll take it then. I think watching Joe Burrow, for a young guy, he was very patient. I don't know what was going on in his head, but he seemed to really have a control on things and did not seem to be rattled. Now I know, I've played with guys that they on the outside don't seem to be rattled, but if I'm around them long enough, they show little tendencies that may not be glaring, but that means that they are rattled. So, but from the outside looking in, from my couch, he looked pretty good. And, maybe some other couches, they didn't probably like him, but I mean, he looked good for mine. And Thursday, I'll be sitting in my office chair, so I think he'll probably look the same, which is the right pick for the right team, for what they need and what direction they're trying to go.
I thought it was a really encouraging start, right, Joe?
Good.
We're warming up for tomorrow.
Yes.
Go ahead.
He definitely exceeded my expectations. I thought that he is in the most difficult position of any player in the NFL, being a pick with high expectations at a position that takes a long time to learn in an offseason that they've had, 15 practices as a team in that offense. And that's as hard of a situation as you can possibly be in. And as a rookie quarterback, that's just meat in the water for a defense. And so to be able to take his team back down the field and give this team a chance to win in a 2-minute offense, which is already difficult, not to mention being a rookie in that situation, was really impressive. I mean, he took what the defense gave him. He really did a good job of towing the line between confidence and cocky, because he was out there just cool as a cucumber, delivering the football, never getting rattled, which is so rare for a rookie quarterback, but also giving his team hope. He kind of had that little bit of swagger to him, I got this. I've been here before. I know I've never done it here on this level, but I know what this is all about. That's got to give a lot of confidence to that entire Bengals organization that we got the right guy. So it'll be really interesting to watch on Thursday. Now that the Browns have a little bit of tape on them, and kind of maybe they're not going to see a lot of tendencies because it's a small sample size, but they're going to see a few tendencies as far as his eyes and his footwork and formationally and where he likes to go with the football in certain coverages and certain route concepts. But are they going to be able to take advantage of it, or is he going to be able to continue to evolve, continue to grow? Because the one question I always have when a rookie does a good job is, were they just being vanilla and just giving him checkdowns because they didn't know what he was going to do? Or were they really throwing a lot of stuff at him and making him think? Because usually once the defense kind of hones in on who you are as a quarterback, they start to eat you up. And if you can't go to your things that you haven't shown being really good at, they eat you up, and then you don't make it very long in the league.
I think that they should feel really good about that start. I mean, the first half was a little bit of a mixed bag, but I think he was a lot better in the second half. Look, he struggled early, took some sacks, he missed some open guys. The first 3 possessions were not great. They all ended in punts, but then, of course, he ran it in on their 4th possession there for the 23-yard score. I think that the thing that impressed me the most was on that final drive, the fact that he looked so poised. He managed the clock so well over those last few minutes. They didn't have any timeouts left. And I think that he was able to really make some great laser throws into tight windows, spread it around. He covered 70 yards in that final drive. And I think at the end, with the OPI call on A.J. Green, and then, of course, the ensuing missed field goal, just watching Burrow's face, I think it was all of our faces at that point.
So that was, it's a little longer than most of our sound bites of the week, John, but and not much additional analysis that we can provide. But I did want to share that with the fans, not only because I thought it was interesting hearing 2 Hall of Fame players talk about it, and Colleen Wolfe, a prominent anchor on the NFL Network, talk all about Joe Burrow and their performances. But that kind of seems to be, even though we were kind of a little hard on him earlier in the show, that kind of seems to be a national narrative or a consensus opinion in terms of Joe Burrow's performance in week 1.
He gutted it out, and I think we need to make that clear because, you know, we're hard on him because, unfortunately, he didn't play well. Because he didn't play well, they were in that position in the first place, but he managed to get him out as best as he could. Now, he doesn't decide what gets to be thrown a flag or not, but he threw a great ball to AJ Green that would have been the go-ahead touchdown, and maybe if a different ref was back there as the back judge, you know. So for the things that he could control in those moments, like, he delivered, and I think that is worthy of praise. And I'm not surprised at all that 2 guys in Joe Thomas and Steve Smith, who are hard to really generate praise from, were able to give it to him. So he's proving himself to be the guy that he is. But of course, it's going to take time. He wasn't there completely for this game because it was his first game. And like Thomas said, he only had 15 practices. Only about 7 of those had featured contact with it. So, you know, it takes time. But for what we saw at the beginning of his career, like, again, it's good for now.
Yep. Well, I wanted to share that with you all. Thanks for indulging me. I thought it was pretty entertaining and pretty interesting to hear their take. I know it was a little longer than normal, but I think it also provides, that soundbite of the week provides a nice segue into us talking a bit about the Bengals taking on the Browns in Cleveland on Thursday night. They kind of touched on it a little bit in that soundbite of the week, not overly much so, but How much do you think this game is important in terms of Joe Burrow showing improvement, in terms of maybe even getting a win on the road, divisional opponent, Battle of Ohio, primetime TV? How important do you think this game is for a good performance out of Joe Burrow in terms of his development and confidence level for everybody associated with the Bengals?
Well, if you want to get really big picture, like, this is to avoid the 0-2 start. You know, teams who start 0-2 have like a 14 or 11% chance of making the playoffs. So essentially, you're not all the way eliminated, but it's like being really bad, like in week 8. You know, it's hard to come out of that. So there's obviously implications with that because both teams are trying to go against that. But I think, like, the Browns, again, they're going to come out Burrow with ferocity. Like, unfortunately for Bobby Hart, he only faced Joey Bosa, I think, on like 70 or 75% of his pass blocking snaps. Myles Garrett stayed on the left side of the Browns defensive line for the entirety of week 1, going up against the right tackle for every single snap. So if that stays the same, he's going to get 60 minutes of Myles Garrett, who was even more of an athletic freak as an edge rusher compared to Joey Bosa. So if that becomes a problem again and Burrow continues to run for his life, you know, they need to make an adjustment a lot quicker than they did on Sunday, because fortunately for Burrow and the Bengals offense, Browns don't really have a secondary right now. You know, Greedy Williams is out, Grant Delpit's out for the year. All they really have is Denzel Ward. They traded for Rodney Harrison, but their secondary is just terrible, and that's why they had such an awful performance against Lamar Jackson. So there is an advantage for him to exploit, and that can be the avenue that leads him to progression and improvement. And for Burrow overall, again, like it's hard to go on. Like this is the same situation that Deshaun Watson was in his rookie year. He started out of the gate week 1, and his first road game was against the Bengals on Thursday night back in 2017. And Watson had like a long touchdown run, but as a passer, I don't remember him doing anything really special in that game. It ended up being a low scoring game, and that the Watson barely squeaked out. So I don't expect Burrow to just again make these incredible strides and light the Browns on fire, even though it's LOL the Browns and they have a bad secondary. There's still going to be mistakes. He's still going to face a lot of pressure against that Browns defensive front, but there are parts of this Browns roster that can be exploited, and it's up to Burrow and the Bengals to do the best to try their best to do that.
Before we get to the injury report, you kind of talked about a couple of players, and there are some very important players for both teams, either questionable or out for this game. Well, and I'll share that in just a second. We're talking quarterbacks. Burrow going into Cleveland and potentially, getting a win there, what that would mean. I know we don't cover the Browns, John, but I think this is a big game for Baker Mayfield's career. He is 12-18 as a starter throughout different smatterings of starts in 3 different seasons. There are a lot of questions kind of starting to arise about him. And I got to tell you, in this media Zoom meeting I was in today where I played that soundbite of the week, Mary Kay Cabot of the Cleveland Plain Dealer was in there and was asking Joe Thomas some pretty poignant questions about concerns with Baker Mayfield. I know it's early. I know, he's only got 30 starts in, 2+ what equates to 2+ seasons, but didn't play well last week. There's kind of some off-season stuff with him. And of course, the mega failure that was last year. How big of a game do you think it is for Baker Mayfield this week?
Just watching the Ravens, I watched just the first half of that Ravens game on the condensed version on Game Pass, and I listened to Robert Mays and Nate Tice on the Athletic Football Show talk, and they said it better than I could. Like, when is Baker going to not see ghosts anymore? Like, I wonder what those ghosts look like, because he clearly still sees them. The Browns' offensive line played pretty well against the Ravens' defensive line, and he was still abandoning pockets predominantly to his right, which is what he did last year. He showed clear regression in his sophomore year last season and just regressed into this quarterback that we didn't even see back in Oklahoma, and he still looks like that same guy. So eventually it has to click. There's still talent on that offense. The offense line's completely revamped, and it should be an above average one by the time we get to the end of the season. Unfortunately, a couple of guys are hurt for them, and that may complicate some things tomorrow on Thursday. But there was opportunities for Baker Mayfield to play a lot better than they did on Sunday, and he just couldn't. And ultimately, they fell into a hole that they couldn't come out of, because Lamar Jackson's a cheat code and on NFL blitz, and he's impossible to beat when he gets going like that. So, I mean, Mayfield just he's falling into the same trap and to the same curse that every Cleveland quarterback seems to end up being. There was an argument for him, kind of breaking that and being the exception to the rule, but for whatever reason, he just can't get over his own self, and he's just regressing tremendously from the quarterback that we saw at Oklahoma. So this is obviously a huge game for him, because he's going up against a new quarterback that entered the division, a new Heisman Trophy winning quarterback that is ultimately more pro ready at this point than even he is. And he's 2 years younger than him. He has got 30 less games of NFL experience on him, and he still looks more poised than he ever has looked in the NFL. So, it's up to the Bengals to put pressure on him, and it's up to the secondary to clamp down on Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr., because if they do that, I'm just not scared of Baker Mayfield right now. And I wouldn't have said that back in 2018 when he was, contending for NFL Rookie of the Year. So this is huge for him in terms of his long-term future with Cleveland.
I believe Baker Mayfield has a 2-1 record against the Bengals. I think he kind of stepped in for the second start, the infamous Hugh Jackson game, right? Where he taunted Hugh Jackson. He got a win there. And they split last year, the Bengals getting a win at the end of the season for Zach Taylor. So, I think he does have a winning record against the Bengals. It's just a matter of, and that does weigh, that has some weight in Cleveland, but, that only goes so far when you're finishing 6-10, 7-9, etc. I'm going to share my screen here, John, and show the Bengals injury report. The injury report for both teams. Not good news, my friend. Geno Atkins and Mike Daniels. Geno Atkins was out last week. Mike Daniels came in. in relief of him on the interior of the defensive line. Sam Hubbard complimented Mike Daniels in his play, gutting out a decent performance given the fact that Daniels was already hobbled going into that game and had to play a massive amount of snaps since Atkins was out. We heard from Bengal Jim at his tailgate. Troy Blackburn ran by him when he was setting up his drive-through tailgate saying, Geno was going to be 50-50 for this game. It sounds like, if we're to believe that week 3 should be the return, especially with the extended week. Probably the same thing with Mike Daniels, a few extra days of rest, but both of those guys are out. Sean Williams is out, John, once again. Xavier Su'a-Filo is out with an ankle injury. They put him on IR. He should, depending on the severity of that, should be able to return in a couple of weeks, but he will not play. Randy Bullock is in. Billy Price is in for Su'a-Filo. What do you on the Bengals side of things? What do you make of all of this?
Well, I guess this is the time of the show we have to acknowledge Jake Lisco in the comments section, because I saw he had a projected 48-man active roster for the Bengals on Thursday, and he had Trayvon Henderson a part of it, and I wasn't aware that Trayvon Henderson was elevated to the roster off of the practice squad for the second week in a row. If that is the case, then maybe he actually sees the field in place of Sean Williams, who is out and was expected to be out on such a short week. Without Atkins and Daniels on the defensive line, I think that just means that Christian Covington's starting next to DJ Reader, and both those guys aren't necessarily great pass rushing threats from the 3 technique spot, but I think Covington's going to get the nod at that spot. I would like it to be Andrew Brown, because I think he just adds a little bit more upside as a pass rusher, but I think Brown played like 10 or 14 snaps on the defensive line, even with Reader and Daniels out for part of the game. So he's just falling out of favor, I guess, and that's why I think they elevated Amani Bledsoe. They didn't elevate; they just outright signed him to the active roster when they put Su'a-Filo on IR. So Bledsoe's going to get snaps at 3 technique. Brown's going to get snaps behind during Covington. So that's just the 4-man rotation that they have up front, and that's an area that I'm sure the Browns are licking their chops at to exploit, because by and large against the Ravens, like early on in the game, like Nick Chubb and Kareem Hubbard were creating some damage, and it was partly because Wyatt Taylor had like a 91.6 run blocking grade against the Ravens. Like he was paving the way at right guard for them. Joel Bitonio and JC Tretter both had pretty good games as well. Again, Tretter is, I think, questionable for this game, so he's going to be a game time decision. If he can't go, that's going to be a blow to their running game. But I think that's the point of emphasis that they want to exploit right now, because there's a clear lack of depth in terms of bodies for the Bengals defensive line right now. And that's really the strength of the entire Browns roster. It's just the interior trio that they have up front. So it'll be interesting to see how they utilize Reader and Covington now that they are the lone 2 starters that they have. I don't expect them to go into a lot of 3-4 sets with 3 defensive tackles, just because they just don't have a lot of depth there. Even if the Browns are going to try to run heavy on them, I think they're just going to live and die by the even front, which is okay, and it's not going to matter that much. But yeah, I mean, Atkins and Daniels not being there, it's going to hurt the pass rush, and I think it was unlikely at best that Atkins was even going to play on such a short week. I think the Eagles game was always going to be the realistic return for him, but it's up to the edge rushers to generate pressure against these tackles. Like, this is Jedrick Wells' second career start if he actually plays. I think Jack Conklin's questionable too, and along with Chris Hubbard. So God only knows who the tackles are going to be. This is a prime opportunity for Carlos Dunlap, Sam Hubbard, and Carl Lawson to get home and pressure Baker Mayfield, who, again, is still seeing ghosts in clean pockets. So just imagine what he'll do against actual pressure off the edge.
Big evenings in terms of being under the microscope. I'm not predicting big evenings for them per se, but big evenings for Carl Lawson. He had a couple of pressures and I believe a sack last week. Covington was in there. He was active when Reader went out, made a couple of plays, but like we said, the noticeable difference when Reader was not in that defense was obvious. So Reader needs to remain in there, and the Bengals need to find a way to generate more consistent pressure, whether that is Sam Hubbard playing better, mixing in. Khalid Kareem had a couple of snaps in there last week. We'll see what happens with him this week. Andrew Brown will now be in the mix because of the injuries to Atkins and Daniels in the interior. So, they're going to have to kind of mix things up and put things together. But like you said, if you look at the Browns, I I would venture a guess that the 6 questionable players that they have 4 that are out. Johnson, the cornerback, Phillips, the linebacker. You mentioned Williams, Greedy Williams, the cornerback, out. And then Mac Wilson, the linebacker, he is out. But those 6 questionable guys, Conklin, the tackle, Hubbard, the tackle, Treader, the center, Jarvis Landry, the wide receiver, Olivier Vernon, questionable. I mean, these are big names in here. And then Jedrick Wills is on there. So, I mean, I would venture to guess probably conservatively half of those questionables will play. But it seems that the Browns are in pretty bad shape on the injury front as well.
Yeah, and like that, like they already have a weak secondary even with guys healthy. So like if that offensive line isn't ready to go, like it has to be assumed that they want to just pound Nick Chubb this game because they know that the Bengals are weak up front, and they probably believe that's the best chance of their offense actually succeeding early in the game and taking some perceived pressure off of Mayfield. If they have guys injured though, and even when you still like DJ Reader's still a quality run defender, he had like a quality run defense grade against the Chargers. He made some good plays at run defense. If he's out there, like it's still going to be a tall task even with their starters out there. So it's up to the other guys. It's up to the linebackers to crack down and stay in their fits and to at least limit Chubb, because I think like Chubb still had like a ton of yards after contact against the Ravens. He's the king of yards after contact. So it's up to just, if not bring him down, at least slow him down a little bit so other guys can kind of corral him. So that's going to be the clear, obvious plan for them, especially on such a short week. They don't want to put a lot on Mayfield after the game he just had, but if they don't have the bodies up front to do it, it could be a long day for them.
Could, for a game touted for 2 number 1 overall draft picks, quarterbacks over the past couple of years, the game could be a lot about the running backs on both teams, like you mentioned, John. So interesting kind of twist there. We're running up against, we're going a little long here. I don't know if you want to make any bold predictions or predictions about the game. I'd love to hear that, and or some of your players to watch this week as the Bengals battle the Browns on a short week.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. This secondary for the Browns is just straight up awful. Like, Anderson Deo is at least 3 years past his prime. Terrence Mitchell is starting for some reason. Denzel Ward, again, is decent, but he can't do it all by himself. Excuse me. I have a good friend who's a big Browns fan, and he asked me to look up Tavir Thomas's PFF grade. I'm like, who the hell is Tavir Thomas? He's a 3-year player that mostly played special teams for his first 2 years. He's starting at slot cornerback. You know his pass rating that he allowed against the Ravens? 158.3. It's a perfect passer rating. Like, if Tyler Boyd doesn't go off for at least 80 yards this game, something severely went wrong. Like, Boyd didn't have a target for the first, I think, 40 minutes of Sunday's game. But the 4 targets that he did have in the final 20, 3 of them went for first downs. He was one of the more impactful receiving options for that offense. And I think he had 2 crucial third down conversions in the fourth quarter on that last drive. So he has a clear mismatch against the secondary, Tavir Thomas, who, again, I don't even know if he's a real NFL player. If he doesn't go off for at least 75, 80 receiving yards, they did a horrible job game planning for this game. So we got to make these things wild. Like, we got to make these predictions interesting, or else no one's really going to listen to them. And I hope if I'm 0-16 by the end of it, it was worth it in my opinion. So Tyler Boyd, 85 yards, I'm calling it.
Tyler Boyd, 85 yards. Okay. I will call a coming out party for T. Higgins. I think that, yes, they had some snaps when I referenced Auden Tate and T. Higgins. They had some snaps. Joe Burrow didn't really look their way. Like you mentioned, the Tyler Boyd not looking his way until the second half was I didn't understand that one. That guy's Mr. Clutch, especially when it comes to moving the sticks, extending drives. So I'm gonna go bold and say T. Higgins with a coming out party. What that looks like, I don't know, but I think he gets in the end zone. I think the Bengals are going to score obviously more points this week. Hard to score less. So I think that T. Higgins will have a coming out party of sorts, get into the end zone. And I think that group in general is one I'm really interested in watching this week. You know, AJ Green led the team with 5 catches for 51 yards. You look at that and you go, what a pedestrian stat line. But we talked about the missed throw that would have been it touched, probably, I don't remember where the ball was right offhand, but a 30-yard touchdown or so. Then, of course, the game-winning touchdown that was called back, all of a sudden his stat line could have been huge. So I thought he looked pretty well. I thought he played pretty well in the game. He's making some tough catches across the middle and helping out his quarterback. So, it wasn't an outstanding game by AJ Green. Some of it was on him, some of it was not. Some of it was him actually making plays. So he's interesting to me for your reasons that you laid out. Tyler Boyd is interesting to me. Mike Thomas made a couple plays last week. I'm interested to see if the rapport continues on there, but I'm really interested to see if Auden Tate, T. Higgins get more snaps and or more targets this week, because I think, like you mentioned, that battered Cleveland secondary, they're going to try and feast on that. Even though they want to establish the run, the Bengals, that is, I think that they want to also spread the ball around and really feast on that battered secondary.
T. Higgins, Mike Thomas, Alex Harrison, CJ Zoma, Drew Sample. I don't care. Put him in the slot. Tavir Thomas, expose him.
Yep. And my bold prediction last week that didn't work out. We don't need to revisit that. That didn't really work out so well for me. Do you have a score prediction, John? I know you're not a fan of those per se, but
I think the spread. It was 5.5 one place. It was like 8.5 in another place.
Yeah.
I think it's a good one for the Bengals to cover this week, like they did last week. I know a lot of people care about the actual betting spread about it, but let's screw it. Like 23-20 Bengals.
The spread last week, what was it? 2.5, 3 points?
3.5, I think.
Yeah, and of course they lose by 3. So Vegas kind of knows what they're doing sometimes, right? I keep telling myself Bengals are going to win this one. They're going to right the ship. Coming out party for Joe Burrow and, like I mentioned, T. Higgins, etc. I don't know. I go back to the primetime stuff. Like I said, I'm an old dog here, and the cynic in me is hard to drive out. What I saw last week was just a lot of old demons coming up here. I don't know if it's good to get it out week 1. If it's going to happen, get it out week 1 and get it going the rest of get things right the rest of the season. I will say, oh boy, do I want to pick him this week? I don't know if I want to pick him this week. I'll say 26-21 Cleveland. And I'm not very confident about that, but I could see it
26.
Yeah.
Huh.
I'm going weird score. 26-21 Cleveland.
Busy game for Cody Parkey.
It is a game for Cody Parkey, yeah. What would that equate to? I'm not a math guy. That's like 4 field goals for him or something.
When you get Scoregami on the phone.
Anyway, those are our predictions and our breakdown of the game. Don't hold us to it. Anything else before we get on out of here, John? We went a little long, but it's been a really good show. We got a lot to we got through a lot this week.
It was a really good show. Would you do that Zoom format again with like 100 other people interviewing those guys?
It actually only was like 15 to 18 people. It really wasn't that many, but it was a deal where, you gotta click raise your hand and be on mute and you wait. And I mean, it's cool, but it was, I would do it again. I would do it again because it was very interesting. And there was, Peter King was in the room and Doug Farrer from USA Today was in there. These guys that we've been reading for years and years and years were in this interview. So that was kind of neat. But, the Zoom, I'm not a fan of the Zoom thing. It's helped me with this show, sharing my screen and all that stuff. But I don't know.
I wish I could have joined you. Long story short, I could not because I had a scheduled appointment to fix my car. And it was a small business body shop near Voice of America in Westchester. And he noticed that I have a Bengals like debit card that I got like a couple years ago, and I haven't really replaced it. He noticed it, and he said, "Oh, you're a Bengals fan." I was like, I didn't really want to get into it. He said, "Yeah, I took care of a guy back in the '80s. He was the place kicker." I was like, "You took care of Jim Breach?" He's like, "Yeah. He brought in his son's car. It was a piece of crap, and I basically told him it was the worst car I've ever seen. Never saw him again."
That's funny. And his son now works at CBS Sports, right? Isn't it John, his son?
Yeah.
That's a funny story. I would never think to hear that one. That's a good one. Did you get your car fixed up?
Yeah, it did good. And, he didn't screw me out of his appraisal, so that was good.
That's good. And he didn't bash the condition of your car the way he did to John Breach's car.
No, he did not. He did not have an agenda.
Well, thanks, John, and thanks to all of our live listeners. Again, get this show wherever you get your audio podcasts. We're on all the major platforms. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. There is a logo right under John's left shoulder there. Rambles over his right, but the subscribe button's down below his left shoulder. So click that. Join us on Cincy Jungle's Facebook. And those last two platforms are where we will be doing our pregame show courtesy of Narragansett Beer. Come hang out with us. Do your tailgate. However you're doing it in this pandemic era, come join us. Hang out with us. We've got giveaways. We've got special guests, and we're going to have some fun. We look forward to seeing you an hour before kickoff. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks for your support, John. I'll see you tomorrow, my friend.